Hello guys, so welcome to my Capstone Project presentation. And this presentation is about a web application security testing, or let's say a penetration testing that I did. So this presentation, there will be an introduction where I talk about the web application itself, and then what it is, what it do, and then I'll move on to my methods, my procedures, and then some of the tools that I used, and then a framework that I also used. And then there will also be section where I talk about the findings, the vulnerabilities that I found, then how my proof of concept, how I found them. Then I'll also talk about the risk assessment summary. Then I'll also give my recommendations on that. So I chose to test the web app of Ramsey Presbyterian Church. That's a church in Columbus, Ohio. So as you can see, the URL is ramseypresbychurch.org, and then I decided to test the login mechanisms, test for input fields, test for file uploads, and then test some of the URL parameters. And then the purpose for this testing is to check how strong the security of the application is, and then to see if I could find some vulnerabilities, and then assess some impacts, see how much of an impact those threats are, and then I could give some suggestions or some recommendations for those vulnerabilities that I found. So for my procedure, I decided to go with the standard pen testing procedures. That's where I start with planning, and then in this planning stage, I this is where I had to decide on the steps that I'll use, the frameworks that I'll use, and decide this. I also had to get permissions or the permissions that I need. I decided I also had to get a penetration testing agreement with a client, and then I moved to scanning where I had to do the basic information gathering on the web application, and then I moved to actually finding the vulnerabilities that I could get and then try to exploit them. And then, well, during this penetration testing, I was actually taking notes, taking screenshots, putting everything down. So when I was done with everything, I just had to put all those stuff in a document. So that's what the documentation stage was about. And then I also gave my recommendations to the client. So hopefully they take them. Some of the tools that I used was well, this testing was done on a Kali Linux operating system, so that was the testing environment because there are a lot of tools that I could use that I didn't have to download or purchase or anything. Kali Linux could give you that. And I also used Web Suite because that's for the web app testing. And then I used some command line tools like nmap, whatweb, and then sqlmap. And then during information gathering stage, I also had to use Google to find out some information. And then I use the developer tools on the web browser to also find some vulnerabilities there. And then basically this testing was based off the was top 10. So I just tested for SQL injection, command injections, and then other stuff. I also tested for authentication and then other flaws that they could have in there. Tested for misconfigured security headers, sensitive data exposures, access control issues, and then clients and then server-side vulnerabilities. Checked for cryptographic issues, insecure design, just the basic top 10 issues. So that's what it was about. And then so just found some few vulnerabilities, and then it started with like missing HTTP headers. So I used securityheaders.com, and then this is the result that it gave me. So I realized that there was no content security policy, and then no permissions policy. And then this is a vulnerability because it gives attackers the chance to perform XXX, that's client-side scripting, or let's say cross-site scripting, and then also without the permissions policy, users could abuse the browser features. And then this, I would say this has a high likelihood because it uses a common attack surface, and then it can easily be exploited. So I gave it a high likelihood. And then the next finding was exposure of sensitive data. So you could see here the login, and then the password is in plain text, and then that's a very huge vulnerability. So this was done on Web Suite, where I examined the post request and then the response. And then I realized that login information that was inputted wasn't encrypted. So any attacker could actually see the login credentials of users. And then if they're able to tell that it gave an OK response, or it has a status code of 200, they'll be able to tell that, well, at least the login credentials can be used. So yeah, so with this one, I also give it a high likelihood of, like very high, because HTTP traffic is normally intercepted. So if if the credentials are not encrypted, that would be an easy exploit for an attacker. And then the next finding was, well, I used the browser developer tools, and then I realized there was no multi-factor authentication. So if you see the screenshot right here, you could see that you just have to, it takes the user login and then the password, and then if it's right, it just submits it and then redirects it to the to the dashboard here. So you could see that from here, you could tell that there is no multi-factor authentication, and then that's also a vulnerability because it will be susceptible to brute force attacks. Yeah. So I also gave this likelihood of medium because it's brute force attacks are not, you need the brute force attack mechanisms and then credential stuffing mechanisms to do that. So I just gave it a medium. Then the last the last finding of vulnerability I had was the security misconfiguration. Because if you use what's web to scan the web app, you could see that it gives the server information and then server version and then stuff. And then this is a vulnerability because attackers could just find this information and then make targeted attacks on the server. So this the kind of impact it has is that it helps with attackers to know the type of attacks for a particular server that they could do. And then this is also a high likelihood because HTTP traffic. Okay, so with this likelihood, this is a mistake here, but the reason is that such configuration is normally overlooked. So a lot of people just have it in plain sight. Then it gives the attackers information about the server and then helps them to like make targeted attacks to it. So yeah. So based on the likelihood and then impacts of all these vulnerabilities, This is the summary. So with missing HTTP headers, I gave it a high likelihood with a medium impact. So the overall risk level, I gave it a high, and also with a sensitive data exposure, I gave it a high likelihood because a lot of people easily intercept HTTP traffic, and then it's a very huge risk. So I give it a critical impact, and then making it the overall risk level also critical. And then with the authentication flaws, I give it a medium likelihood, but then with a high impact, because with these ones like this, multi-factor authentication is very important. So if they are targeted, let's say, brute force attacks, that could actually put the user at risk. So that also give it a high risk level. And then with the security misconfigurations, I feel it's normally overlooked, so I give it a high likelihood, but it doesn't really pose much threat to the web application, so I give it a medium impact and then put in the overall risk level at medium. So this risk assessment summary is actually based on the last risk rating methodology. Yeah. And then I had some recommendations for the vulnerabilities that I had. So with the missing HTTP headers, I think implementing those missing headers could actually solve those problems like the content security and then the permissions policy. I think that would be able to mitigate that risk. And then with the sensitive data exposure, I feel like implementing HTTPS through HTS will be able to prevent those logins from being in plain text. So having HTTPS or something like that will be able to encrypt the login credentials, preventing users that intercept HTTP traffic from seeing what the logins are. And then with the authentication flows, I feel like multi-factor authentication should be implemented where users have to log in and then actually input a one-time PIN or get an email confirmation or any extra means of authentication that would be able to get secure the user from attacks like brute force, and it actually also helps with social engineering attacks. So if one way or the other they expose their password and credentials, you would actually need a confirmation pin or something, and then that also helps. And then finally, with security misconfiguration, I feel like you just have to be mindful of hiding the server type and then versions on the HTTP header. So you just have to review the security configurations when coding the headers. That will be able to help with that. Yeah, so that will be the end of this presentation. Thank you.